So I'm Nari Senanaika. I'm faculty in the Department of Geography, and I'm just going to speak very briefly, provide a snapshot of my work and gesture towards some bigger themes and questions for the field of global environmental health. So Craig, if you could advance the slides. So for more than 7 years, I have been working in the dry zone of Sri Lanka and documenting an epidemic of mysterious kidney disease there. So the first cases of this disease date back to the early 1990s, and they're geographically concentrated in the island's dry zone and its north central province. So the two regions that are demarcated on the slide in front of you. So this distinct geography has led a lot of the scholars working on this disease to conclude that it's somehow an environmentally induced illness. And while there are many aspects of this disease that are shrouded in mystery, there are two kind of dimensions that I want to emphasize. So first, this disease is simultaneously a problem of disease effects. So it's degenerative, irreversible. It ultimately leads to kidney failure and death. But it's also at the same time a problem for scientific explanation. So it's constantly drawing attention to the limits of how we understand the relationships between health and the environment. If we could do the slide. So I very quickly just want to gesture, I've pulled some headlines here just to gesture some of the very fraught and contradictory debates that circulate about this illness. It's been a catalyst for significant investments in water purification schemes. It's also been a catalyst for a very ambitious national agenda for agrarian reform. And so I work on both of these aspects in my larger research project. But for today, I just want to signal that, while there's a lot of mysteries that continue to circulate about this illness, my intervention is focused really on kind of the debates that try to define this disease and the contestations that surround disease governance in this space. So if you could just advance the slide. So in thinking about these questions, I draw on work in a range of disciplines. I'm trained as a geographer, but I read beyond the field of geography. And I've pulled this quote here from a team of environmental sociologists, so Steve Kroll-Smith, Phil Brown and Valerie Gunter, because I think it points us to some really interesting dimensions around environmental illnesses. And I think these dimensions are potentially fruitful ground for scholars of global health to mine. So in their work, they argue that struggles over environmental illnesses are often struggles over the very nature of what exists and how we know the nature of that phenomena. So if we could advance the slide, I've really been thinking about this provocation a lot, and I return to it quite frequently in my work. And in the very short time that I have left, I just want to reflect on a few research frontiers on new questions that I think this intervention makes, particularly in terms of the field of global health. So first, while I've been working in the dry zone for some 7 years, I think there's still so much that we have to learn from people who live with and navigate uncertainty in day-to-day life, particularly around environmental health risks. So in my own work, I kind of zoom in on the daily grind of what it's like to live in these landscapes, landscapes of disease, but also landscapes of toxic uncertainty. So where the causal agents of disease are uncertain, but the possibility of becoming ill is ever present and unpredictable. So what kind of livelihood struggles does that generate? What type of subjectivities? What type of perceptions of environmental risk? But second and related, I think that there is much need to better incorporate these dynamics into existing frameworks. So how, for example, might these experiences lead us towards much more complex, contingent, and contested understandings of health and its relationship to the environment? So conceptually, my work is interested in expanding the field of global health to grapple with these kind of shifting kind of distinctions between what harms and what heals, particularly in the context of toxic pollution. So that's what I've been working a lot on. But I think it also resonates with some of the other key socio-ecological challenges of our time. So here I'm thinking about health implications of global climate change and interspecies health as well. So onto my final slide. I just wanted to wrap up by signaling that these kinds of contested environmental illnesses are increasingly common. So they may have once been exceptions, but I would wager that in years to come, they will become the norm. And so you can see from this map that Sri Lanka is not the only country that's currently grappling under the weight of mysterious kidney disease epidemics. Hotspots have also been reported in India, in Egypt, and in several countries in Central America. And all of these sites have generated competing theories about this illness. So in closing, I think the field of global health has much to contribute to the study of these kinds of contested environmental illnesses. And in particular, I think we as scholars could do work can investigate how they disperse, how they interact, how they overlap, and also how theories about them come into conflict. So I don't want to run over, so I will end there and pass on to my colleague, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sonoyaki. So hi, I'm John Mills. I am the director of the new product design program here at UK. So just let everybody know we're here, looking forward to collaborating across campus and beyond. So a good question to start with, what is product design? It has a very, often very nebulous kind of manifestation. Next slide, Craig, or there should be an image. There we go. So if you think of architecture is easily named, we kind of know what we're talking about when we talk about architecture. Product design is a way of kind of filling in all of the other props for our lives. And if that takes many different forms, physical products, which are probably the most visible, but also digital products, which of course over the last 10 or 15 years have become so commonplace, as well as what we call platform products, so new services, new systems. And one way to think about what is product design is it's a bridge between new technologies or new processes, new knowledge, and human behavior. And so we kind of give form to those things that link very distant other disciplines together around human experience. So next slide, please. Disciplines are knowable by their process. So I'll share two quick models of design process. This one, non-linear, thinking about how we might actually move through different phases of working through a problem. Next slide. And we like to think that it happens like this. We go from number 1 to number 2 to number 3, and so on and so forth. But next slide. It's in truth, it's very much like this. This is what we call an iterative design process, right? Always navigating around these different new bits of research that we might find in our work, or an entire culture shift that happens under our feet as we're working towards a solution on a complex issue. Next slide, please. So this is one other model that I like to use because it helps kind of lay that very nonlinear process out into something that really starts to give us a way of wayfinding through the beginnings or the impetus, the genesis of a problem that we might want to solve, and then a final kind of solution offering that we might give back to that particular issue. What's important about this particular diagram, it's called the double diamond from the British Design Council. That second diamond on the right-hand side, you'll see at the very top is called designing the thing right. And those images that I showed before about what product design is often that gets a lot of the focus, right? How do we actually deliver on the thing so that it maps to people's expectations and to their lives and to their needs? Next slide. But I really want to focus on this first part of this diagram, which is about what are all the ways that we as designers who are, part of collaborative teams that are addressing some kind of issue, to really understand how we might be designing the right thing. How do we identify that? And any good research process leads you to a point of intervention that is appropriate for the context and is considerate of all the different stakeholders, human, environmental, and so on and so forth. So next slide, please. So what does this look like? I just wanted to pick one project at the undergraduate level that I think is representative of where some of these processes and types of products come together under the umbrella of global environmental health. Next slide. So we know that air pollution, air quality issues are prevalent in different parts of the globe. Beijing gets a lot of attention, except for maybe over the last 10 months or so with wild changes in air quality. But this is, if we think global environmental health issues, this might spring to mind. One of the dangerous things about being a designer who doesn't have access, let's say, to going to Beijing or working in that space, is that we might not be thinking about local kinds of analogs to this. Next slide, please. So Salt Lake City, where I just moved here from, has a very similar problem, the inversions or kind of trapping pollutants under a layer of warm air in a valley area. So another intense air quality health issue. Its impacts across a population are vast. And so, next slide. Just jump into one project that came out of a collaboration with at the University of Utah with design students as well as environmental scientists and members of the community to try to think about how do we research this issue, and then how as designers do we return something to our audience that contextualizes an issue that might feel very abstract. So this is one particular project called the Personal Airshed. If you go to the next slide. Dr. Senanayake mentioned different dimensions, right? And where those different dimensions of a problem may overlap. And this is a very similar process to how we research, looking at geography, population, energy consumption, the policies that govern some of these things, as well as the climate impacts. So very targeted to a local context, but looking through different lenses to see where there might be some kind of opportunity space. Next slide, please. So these are some of those methods, right? Broken down, understanding the geography, what causes that environmental kind of condition, what the impacts are, trying to understand the complexities of those systems and not simplifying them, because then our solutions become simplified. And trying to find analogs to system archetypes that we might be able to understand, inflows and outflows of materials, for instance. Next slide. And then trying to pinpoint some place to actually take a step, synthesize that research, take a step towards moving the conversation forward, moving the dial a bit, concepting, ideating, generating ideas, generating ways of addressing that. And the outcome of this project in particular was an actual, was actually a virtual reality experience that was put on public display so that members of the community could come through and understand what a volume of breathable air was and how the environmental impacts and our industry impacts start to change or get us to rethink the value of that amount of air. So next slide. As I mentioned before, the whole point of design is to be the bridge between knowledge or research or technology or something and human behavior. So again, putting this back into the public sphere, into the hands of the public to be able to move the conversation forward, but also to solicit feedback from community members who may not feel directly connected or have a voice to making changes to something like their own air quality. Next slide. So again, just want to highlight, while we can get to the designing of the thing, both physical and digital products, one of humans' most amazing characteristics is the ability to integrate broadly. And that certainly forms the backbone of the design research process so that we can try to identify designing the right thing. Next one. Next one. So just if anyone's interested, we're here now, please reach out. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, I believe I have about 2 minutes to talk about this. So I'm Isabel Escobar, professor of chemical and materials engineering, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of what I do and the connections of water treatment and water reuse to all that we're talking about. So if we're going to go to the next slide. The plenary speaker today talked a lot about the water crisis and water issues, and for example, the crops, nuts, and in California, and the use of water, and some of the water scarcity that we are facing in the world. And as I show here, one of these images shows about where we are expected to be fairly soon when it comes to water. A very significant portion of the world is under it's deprived of water. And this can be either because of geographical accessibility to water, or this can be because of economic accessibility to water. As again, mentioning the plenary speaker, he showed these pictures, these images of where microplastics are and where plastics are. And they're covering a lot of waters. And as you see on this picture on the top left, the darker colors indicate the most water scarce places on Earth. And those also match with some of the pictures that you show of waterways being just covered with plastics and covered with waste. So the water is available, however, the water is not good for drinking. And because of that, about 1 person dies from waterborne diseases or water scarcity or lack of water in the world every 10 seconds. So just during these presentations, a significant amount of people have died worldwide due to water accessibility. So what I do is I develop materials for a type of filter. Specifically, they're called membrane filters. And these filters are interesting because by fine-tuning the amount of the polymer that we use to the amount of solvent, we can design the pores and we can make it to where we can prevent certain materials from going through while allowing others to go through. So if all that we're interested is removing viruses and bacteria, we can very specifically target those filters. And if we go to the next slide, we have that a lot of these filters do have challenges. And my picture here on the left somehow got sideways. But from that picture, all that I want you to see is that we have a water going in. We have this filter that we call the membrane again. And then there are a variety of ways that the water can go through. There are a variety of interactions that water and the materials that are in the water can have with this filter. So now we're talking about the removal of viruses, of bacteria, of plastics, microplastics, other pollutants, other contaminants, metals. Anything you have present in the water is now accumulating on this filter. And as it accumulates, it starts to grow, it starts to harbor bacteria, and it starts to effectively destroy the filter. And if we go to the next slide, which is a busy, but it's my last slide, and this is what we do. What we do in my world, what we do in the world of my laboratory of the Center of Membrane Sciences. And some of the interesting things that we do, if we just look from the bottom first and then we go to the top, but if we start at the bottom and in that yellowish kind of image, we make specific filters that simultaneously remove and destroy materials. So we're making catalytic filters to destroy what's in the water. So now, if a breakthrough happens, or at the end of life of this filter, at the time of disposal, we will not have these hazardous materials accumulating on the filter. We also worry about, as Jonathan talked about, the production. We design these filters in a way that we're looking at sustainable methods for designing. For example, we use biological derived solvents, so they can be derived all the way from grasses. And we use polymers that can be recycled polymers. We have I have a very large group right now working at, can we use recycled polymers along with bio-derived solvents to make these water filters so that we are not taking something out of the food chain or increasing the carbon footprint. We make a lot of antimicrobial filters. And in these, if we then from antimicrobial materials, if we look on the upper part, we're now pivoting the work and we're using this exact same materials, these exact same filters to actually both filter and destroy and inactivate COVID in masks. So we can use the same technology and pivot it for a number of different applications. And then in this way, we can have these materials that are potentially sustainable bio-derived, both helping with the current crisis, but also potential future pandemics and future water issues, because with the global increase in population, we will be reaching more pandemics, we will be reaching more water crisis issues. And with that, I will finish my presentation. I'll let it go to the next slide. And ask if there are any questions for any of us.
Okay, thanks so much to all our presenters. I know I asked them to do an almost impossible task in keeping their talks to their research to about 5 minutes. So I'd like, since we are a small group, just to open it up for any questions. So I guess I'll start with Dr. Escobar. How close do you think you are to actually like putting this into practice in a small village in Ecuador?
That small village in Ecuador, I'm not sure. However, I do have a collaborator at Georgia Tech that I developed. When I talk about the design and the filters and the materials, we're making things about this big. And I have this collaborator that she actually can make sheets out of them. So not at a village in Ecuador. However, we have tested, we have some pilot testing in the country of Jordan. And they are one of the most water scarce countries in the world because they have just very highly saline waters. And with their temperatures, these are also very biologically active waters. So we have piloted in the Middle East, but not in South America or Latin America yet. But we're working on it. It's in the process of trying to scale up.
Other questions?
Do you use ion exchange membranes anymore?
Many that use ion exchange membranes. I personally am not in the field of ion exchange membranes, but I have some collaborators here at that. So I am associate director of our Center of Membrane Sciences, and we do have other faculty working on ion exchange membranes.
There are a lot of charitable projects to try to help local communities get clean water. I don't know if the pollution is to the extent that you try to remove it, but do you work with them? I know there are people in Lexington that have been doing that sort of thing in various countries.
Engineering, we have Engineers Without Borders, and they do work with other countries. I know about the situation here in Kentucky of Martin County, where that absolutely does not have access to safe, clean water. I have not worked with them specifically. They have a lot of metals in their water, but I did work when I was at the University of Toledo prior to being here. I was there for 15 years in Ohio, and when Lake Erie had a significant algal bloom and there were algal toxins that came to the water, I dealt a lot with the response to those, and we developed a lot of materials to remove and destroy them, and we're still developing them. The Ohio River, just north of us, does have issues with algal blooms and algal toxins in the water. So there are local communities that deal with that, but I do not specifically yet with, or I have not specifically with any communities in Kentucky yet.
So I hate to cut our discussion short, but I do feel like we're supposed to be back in the auditorium at this point. So thank you so much for joining us. If you have interest in any of these things or want to connect with our presenters, I'd be happy to facilitate that. Craig and I are in the Office of Global Health Initiatives, which is in Bradley Hall. So thanks so much.